Hiya, Phil here, and I've just made my first little scratch robot. Very pleased with it. This was a very easy one to make. I found a video online by Mech, which was inspired by, and in this video I'll show you how I made it, my thoughts about some of the new processes, techniques that I had to use. I just started with a couple of pipes, some wire. This is aluminium crafting wire, and a milk bottle. I thought I'd start with a 5cm body. Using an indelible marker was a bit of a mistake. When it came to painting, it kept bleeding through, so I'll stick with a pencil in future. Started off with a small saw. Found out later that totally didn't need this. I ended up using a coping saw. I know it's the wrong saw for the job, but use what you've got. That's not a coping saw, is it? I think it's called a tenon saw. Oh, I'm going to have to look this up. Tied it up the edges. And for the arms and legs, I used a small piece of plastic, about 3cm long. So I needed 4, one for each limb. Again, using indelible marker. The blue wasn't as bad because I ended up with a blue robot. And as you can see, I'm useless at measuring because they're not level. Again, using the knife, just tidying up the rough edges. Next, I've got to block the ends off. This is where the milk carton came in, because it's fairly flat pieces of plastic. So again, using the wrong sort of pen, mark the sizes and cut them out. So I used sandpaper to flatten it off and also to roughen the joints that I'll be super gluing later. And this is where I ran into my first problem. Plastic doesn't super glue. At least not very well. If it did stick to plastic, then it wouldn't come out of the bottle. I know it does eventually harden, but looking on the internet, people have been shoving baking powder on. Didn't have any baking powder. I thought it'd be just powders, so I've used a bit of plaster of Paris. This did not work at all. Later found that baking powder changes the pH factor of the super glue, and that's what makes it set. So I have to rush out and get some baking powder. Lots of baking powder. And this was like magic. But it did leave the joints very crusty. And I ended up calling this robot Krusty. Krusty the robot. But anyway, it made the super glue instant. Very pleased with the result. So I made markings on the plastic. I'm now using a pencil, that's the best thing. Easily paint over that. Just to keep things symmetrical. Ooh, power tools. Here we go with the drill. And unfortunately the wire was just a touch thicker than the drill bit. Threading the wire through, and it's a bit loose, so super gluing it in place. Lots of baking powder. So after using the drill to make all these holes, I actually found that using the crafting knife and making a cross, two little cuts in a shape of a cross, was much firmer and held the wire in place much better. And I wanted the wire to go all the way up to the top, just to give it a bit more strength and so it'll hold the weight. Now putting the leg tubes on. So looking at it, I don't think that these plastic tubes actually work. They just look a bit too bulky, a bit numb. But the wire legs themselves look a little spindly, so I need to bulk them out. And I found that a drinking straw was a perfect size, just fit over the wire and made the legs look a little more bulky. In fact, if I cut it just right, it'd make it look like it's got joints. So that's going to work. Now what can I do about the hands? Now I have some more crafting wire. This one's slightly thinner gauge. I thought a claw would do. Time for the feet, and luckily the leg tubes that I'd made, I thought I could just cut those in half, make perfect feet. So I've got the plastic pipes, cut them in half, and need to box everything in with the milk carton. So I sanded all the joints, and I'm sure that I sanded the milk carton plastic bits and glued the other side. Anyway, still worked. Lots of super glue, lots of baking powder. And trim everything up with my crafting knife. This is starting to come together now. So let's give this robot a bit of movement, just so it doesn't look like it's stood there waiting. One claw open, one claw shut, just so you can see what it can do. And let's have it walking. These big feet make a nice firm base. It'll stand up with them. So we've got the basic robot shape now. Let's add some greeblies to it. So I've got some bits from a from a spray bottle, pulled it to bits, and found nice little tubes that I can use for the eyes. And from the spray pump, I even found a little glass ball that looks like a lens. Putting that in. Also found other grommets that I could add to it, but it still didn't look right. So let's bulk it up a bit with more bits from my milk carton. So let's break the tube up a bit more and add something to the back. Here's a good technique I learned. Sand it into shape so there's more gluing surface. So I put the sandpaper over a plastic tube and sanded a nice curved edge to this plastic. And now it fits nearly perfectly. More super glue and baking powder. Yeah, looking good now. So let's fill all the gaps in. Lots of super glue, lots of baking powder. This stuff was getting everywhere. Next build, I'm going to be much more sparing with it. It was really looking crusty now. No smooth joints, just lots of rough, crusty super glue and baking powder joints. In the end, even the baking powder and super glue wasn't filling the joints in the straws, so I used a little bit of plaster of Paris to fill it all off, and also to cap the ends of the straws off. Painting time! And I'm going to cover everything with a grey primer. But just before I did that, I put a little bit of blue tack over that glass lens, my glass ball in the eye, just so I didn't get paint on it. So being inspired by Chris, I thought I'd make it quite rusty and started off with this brown base layer. It actually looks like red lead. This thing isn't going to rust. I dabbed it on because I didn't want paint marks, but the paint I've got is that, oh, it's rubbish stuff. And even dabbing on just left lots of dab marks. It wasn't going on smoothly, but with this build, I think it might add to the look of it instead of making it look rubbish. Let's continue. So I found a picture of rusty metal. I thought I'll just use all these colours that are in it. So next one is a yellowy red colour. I'll just dab that all over. And then I dabbed over it with purple. So now it's looking, not quite rusty, but colourful. Right, now the main paint. I wanted blue, so I'm going and dabbing blue on, now a light blue, nearly to the edges. I want to leave some of this rust colour on the edges, and also patches are here and there. So dabbing on again, because I don't want any brush marks, but I was getting them anyway, even though I was dabbing. That's looking good. Now let's put some dark blue on. This will really make it pop. And I really didn't like this. It looked horrible now. So going back over with light blue, and let's get you to that dark. We're actually leaving some of the dark blue, dabbing it on. It's starting to look a bit, it's starting to look okay now. I'm really liking the look of this now, but it still looks, I should have put a mouth on it. It still looks wrong, so anyway, scratches. Found a picture of some scratches and let's copy some of these. So white paint, and this is actually a fine brush that I've cut down, so it's only got a few bristles left. Oh, and this is looking really good now. And so I've got some silver metallic paint. Let's do the edges with this. Real experimenting now. Couldn't make it any worse. this is, oh yes, really making it pop. This, I hope this comes out on the camera because I am really loving this now. This is making it look very metallic. Doesn't make good scratches, but oh yeah, the edges look really good now. Now it's still too shiny, so let's give it a wash. I'm using oil paints now. Oil paint and white spirit. Just make a tiny bit. And paint it on. And this is really making it look used. I'm liking this, I'm liking this. It's really dulling the shiny acrylic paint. I'm not going all over, just here and there. So let's remove the masking blue tack from the eye lens. And oh yes, that looks good. And here we go, finished job. I'm very pleased with it. Beauty shots. So if you found this video helpful and want to see more crafting videos, please subscribe. This is Phil saying ta for now. I like this.